Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military of a Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 29th of January of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And today, the most important update and the most important piece of news is a mystic energy ceasefire. So why do I call this ceasefire as a mystic? The thing is that during the previous 24 hours, neither pro-Russian sources nor pro-Ukrainian sources, official sources, confirmed the existence of this energy ceasefire. Furthermore, when talking about the Russian side, for example, today Peskov stated that he didn't state it, he declined to comment on the alleged agreement between Russia and Ukraine on an energy ceasefire. As for pro-Ukrainian sources, almost every single, media reported about the situation, and it seems that the Ukrainians didn't expect this ceasefire. So, for example, just yesterday, the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, stated that the Russian army is preparing for a new combined attack. Intelligence is providing information on this matter. So, as you can see, according to this statement, Zelensky, the Ukrainian armed forces, the special forces, the intelligence service of Ukraine expected that the Russians would attack Ukraine in coming days. But for some reason, starting from this morning of the 29th of January, the Russians began reporting, pro-Russian sources, unofficial pro-Russian sources began reporting about this fire. They're saying that this morning, somewhere at 9 a.m., pro-Russian, Russian forces, rocket forces, drone forces began receiving updates and orders not to attack objects of energy infrastructure through the territory of Ukraine. And let's discuss this in details, because this is a very tricky thing. I would like to point to attention that, first of all, this is a very tricky thing. First of all, we need to understand that within the next several days, another meeting between Russian delegation and the Ukrainian delegation is going to take place on the territory of the United Arab Emirates. For example, this was stated and confirmed by Peskov. The upcoming talks in Abu Dhabi could last 2 days if necessary, according to the Kremlin. Other statements from the presidential press secretary. The modalities of the meeting in Abu Dhabi with Russia's participation will be agreed upon by February 1. Peskov declined to comment on the alleged agreement between Russia and Ukraine on an energy ceasefire and many other different things. First of all, we need to understand that all these statements, all these mystic statements about energy ceasefire doesn't play any role for the military situation in Ukraine. So because we need to understand that these two things, like the mystic energy ceasefire and upcoming talks on the territory of Abu Dhabi, are the pieces of the same puzzle. I would like to explain to you this situation. First of all, we need to pay attention not to this energy mystic ceasefire, not to the statements of authorities, and probably not even to the upcoming meeting on the territory of the United Arab Emirates. First of all, we need to understand and we need to see the weather forecast, because as of this situation, this is the most important thing. First of all, we need to see and we need to understand when the temperature in Ukraine will be the worst and when the temperature in Ukraine will become better. So according to this picture, starting from the 30th of January of 2026, starting from tomorrow's Friday and until the next Friday, the weather in Ukraine will be very bad and probably the worst in this year. But the thing is that the worst bad, so there is like 7 days, almost 7 days of a very bad weather, but we need to understand that there are 4 days of the worst days of the worst days, and these 4 days starts right exactly on the 1st of February. So on the 1st of February, so this means this Sunday, right exactly during these talks between Russia and Ukraine. So basically, the thing is that the Russians unofficially today announced about the existence of this mystic energy ceasefire doesn't change anything, because this ceasefire will work right exactly until the end of talks on the territory of Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates. So which means that if these talks finish probably not in Russian favor, if during these talks, during this negotiation process, Ukraine doesn't accept demands and from the Russian side, then most likely after these talks finish, the Russians will carry out massive missile attack with drones and missiles, with everything they can, and most likely they will deal a critical damage to the entire energy infrastructure of Ukraine, of the city of Kiev, of the city of Dnipro, Odessa, Zaporozhye, Lvov, and so on. And this will happen right before the worst days of this year. So which means that the Russians can start these attacks during the night between Sunday of the 1st of February and Monday of the 2nd of February. As a result of this attack, the Russians may deal significant damage to the entire energy infrastructure, and during the next 4 days, the entire system, the entire energy system of Ukraine will collapse completely. So right now you see just a very tricky game from the Russian side, because we need to understand that this piece of news was currently every single Ukrainian knows about this. Every single Ukrainian in every part of Ukraine, and not just Ukraine but abroad, knows that for some reason the Russians announced a mystic ceasefire, which means that obviously this mystic ceasefire could be finished, and everything right now depends on the results of talks on the territory of the United Arab Emirates. And the most important thing that you need to understand that this mystic ceasefire once again doesn't change anything, because the Russians they didn't plan to attack Ukraine during this period of time until the end of these talks. The Russians announced this mystic energy ceasefire as if they announced, let's say, that New Year comes on the 1st of January, or this is like the same thing. It's the same thing as if the Russians announced that Monday will come right after Sunday. So it's everybody understand this, but this announcement it like makes people think that now everything depends on Ukraine and Zelensky himself personally. And for example, if Russia let's say begins attacking Ukraine energy infrastructure and dealing critical damage to its infrastructure on the night between the Sunday and Monday, between the 1st and the 2nd of February, of course, who is going to be responsible for this? Obviously, everybody understands that Zelensky will have a personal responsibility for this, because the Russians announced a ceasefire, and now we see that the Russia is attacking, and everything is collapsing. So this is a very interesting game from the Russian side. Of course, let's wait and see what is going to be next, because once again, according to Zelensky's statement, he didn't expect this ceasefire. He expected that the Russian Federation would attack Ukraine before the 1st of February, before talks, but most likely the Russians will postpone this attack at the end of the negotiation process, which means that the Russians are giving Zelensky an option to accept the Russia's demands and not to allow the entire energy infrastructure of Ukraine to be destroyed. Another important thing, for example, today the press secretary of Putin, Peskov, also emphasized that Russia is currently talking about Moscow, not about the United Arab Emirates, as the venue for Putin's meeting with Zelensky. Peskov stated. He added that Zelensky has not yet responded to the repeated invitation to Moscow. So once again, during this week, the Russians invited Zelensky for 2 times to visit Russia. First, the invitation was sent by Ushakov. So if Zelensky is indeed ready for a meeting, then please, we invite him to Moscow. Russia is ready to guarantee his security. The issue of a possible meeting has been raised several times during phone conversations between the Russian President Trump, Ushakov noted. So this is the second invitation to Zelensky to visit Moscow and to see and to meet with Putin face to face, and to handle everything, and to handle every single issue that the Russian Federation and Ukraine still have. But as of the first probably proposal to visit Moscow, as of the second one, we see that Zelensky ignores these statements, and most likely he's not going to go anywhere. And of course, if Zelensky goes to Moscow, this is going to be the beginning, probably of even of a capitulation. So now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and let's discuss before moving further, let's discuss a few more interesting, let's say, updates. So this video today was published from one of the power stations from the territory of the city of Kiev. This video was published by pro-Russian sources, and once again, this is one of the power stations on the territory of the city of Kiev, and the author of this video is saying that this is the reason why there are no electricity, where there is no electricity, and why there are power outages through the capital and through the entire territory. So these are the reasons, because the power stations were damaged heavily by Russians, have been damaged heavily by Russians since the beginning of the special military operation. So this is the first thing. Another important thing, and it's not just an important thing, this is something like a huge panic, a huge problem for Ukrainians. So this is a Geran drone that was flying somewhere above Ukraine, and as you can see, this drone is flying at a record low altitude, almost 10 meters from the surface. And the thing is that this drone was guided by, let's say, a person, by a soldier or somebody from the Russian side. And the most important thing, that this drone has a strong connection with the Starlink system. So this is the main problem for Ukrainians, because they used to have possibilities to suppress these drones with their electronic warfare equipment, but due to connections due to use of the Starlink systems, Ukraine lost the possibilities to suppress drones, which means that the current Russian drones are much more effective than they used to be. So this is the situation. And for example, today the Minister of Defense of Ukraine stated that the Ukrainian Minister of Defense is working with the SpaceX to block Starlink on Russian drones. The Ukrainian Minister of Defense, together with SpaceX, is already working to address the issue of Russian drones using Starlink, but as of now they haven't found any solution. And maybe you know that this is another reason why Ukrainians began talking with Russians, began probably making some concessions or on the matter of the peaceful settlement, because the Starlink systems with drones, too many drones, missiles, much faster missiles from the Russian side, attacks on energy infrastructure, and it seems that the entire picture looks like inevitable. Anyway, let's wait and see. The weather forecast gives us lots of updates and understanding how exactly the things are going to be developed. Just let's wait and see. And now let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first, let's talk about the Sumy direction. During the previous 12 hours, the Russians improved their positions significantly. And first of all, the Russians improved their positions in the most northern part of the Sumy region. Today, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and the group of forces north stated that Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Bilozera. So this is the second village in this area that was captured, has been captured by Russians since the beginning of this month. The first one was the village of Komarivka. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this village was captured by Russians. Yes, this village was captured by Russians on the 14th of January. So let's say 15 days later, the Russians managed to improve their positions around the area and to take another village under control. So it seems, according to this logic, the Russians will continue creating a buffer zone along the border with Ukraine, and most likely these three villages like Sidorovka, Chervona Zarya and Babylivka would be the next task for the armed forces of the Russian Federation. The Russians first will try to create a very powerful foothold on the Ukrainian side of the border. Furthermore, there is a very powerful, huge forest, and only then most likely Russians will continue advancing further in the direction of the northern part of Sumy region. And I would like to remind you that this is a very important site. So this is a very important launching site because Ukraine is using this territory to attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. If we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of this month, we'll see lots of updates, lots of geolocations of how Russians were attacking. Sometimes trucks with drones, sometimes equipment that Ukrainians were using for different purposes, sometimes even launching sites with significant number of drones almost ready to be launched deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. For example, in this video we can see a launching site that was attacked by Russians. In this video we can see that the launching site was already prepared, and here we can see at least maybe 7 or 10, up to 10 positions for let's say launching drones deep inside of the territory of Russia, but Russians attacked this territory with Iskander missile and the headquarters were destroyed. So a lot of videos are coming from this area, how Ukrainians are trying to prepare themselves and then to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. So that is why the Russians understand that this territory is very important, and their task to force the Ukrainians to move this launching site further in the southwestern direction, as close as possible to the city of Kiev, to the river of Dnipro, because from these positions, from this area, the distance to the city of Moscow would be more than 600 kilometers, and this is a very huge barrier and gap for Ukrainians. As for the original Sumy direction, during the previous 24 hours, we start receiving updates from the second defense belt and from the area of the villages of Nova Sich, Marina. Here we can see how Russians were bombing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of these huge forests. It seems that the Russians were using not even FABs, but the heavy source flamethrower system. So it seems that everything is ready to begin advancing in the southern direction with the purpose to answer this huge Sumy forest and then to keep advancing further in the southern direction. Another important area is this most southern part of the Sumy region. Here we can see that according to several pro-Russian sources, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly around the village of Lukashevka. But saying the truth, this is not the first time when the Russians answer the village. Since the beginning of the special military operation, the Russians probably 4 or 5 times answered the village, but later they were forced to fall back from this area under the pressure of the armed forces of Ukraine. But maybe this time everything will be different, because you know that there is a railways, as you can see, between the cities of Sumy and Kharkiv, and it seems that right exactly this point, this part, this territory, and this let's say part of Ukraine is the shortest part, where we can see the shortest way to these railways. So the Russians may try to advance in this area, trying to get as deep as possible with the purpose to shorten the distance to these railways, with the purpose to establish complete FPV drone control or artillery control, which will allow the Russians to cut this logistic line, logistic road between the cities of Kharkiv and Sumy. So everything is possible. Here we can see just the shortest way for Russians how to get to these railways. As for the northeastern part of Kharkiv region, the Russians during the previous 24 hours improved their position significantly along the river of Volcha, and the Russians are keeping advancing. Furthermore, pro-Ukrainian sources also confirmed that the Russians established complete control over the northeastern part of the city of Volchansk. As you can see, we have a very huge gap between let's say pro-Ukrainian, neutral, pro-Russian, and let's say pro-Western maps. And the pro-Ukrainian sources are showing the minimal progress on the ground in this area in comparison with any other mapper. The Kupiansk direction. The most important video is coming from the central part. I would like to remind you that several days ago, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and the Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation reported that the city of Kupiansk-Узловой was completely captured by the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation. If you remember, I told you that we had doubts about the situation and we decided to wait for additional updates to make complete changes. And today we received updates, but not to make complete changes, stages, but to understand that most likely the Russians don't have strong control over the territory. So this video was published by pro-Ukrainian soldiers, and here we can see an Ukrainian soldier that was talking about the situation in this area. He was saying that the city of Kupiansk-Узловой is under complete control of Ukraine, and this video was geolocated, and this is exactly the place where the Ukrainian soldier was moving. So based on this video, we haven't adjusted anything because this video took place outside of this red polygon, but this is another proof that maybe there is still something wrong with this, let's say, direction, and it's better to wait a bit more. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Slaviansk direction. As usually, we are receiving lots of updates. The most important updates from the northern Slaviansk direction is coming from the settlement of Lazova. Here we can see lots of attacks carried out by Russians with the drones. The Russians were destroying vehicles. We can see huge concentration of forces in this area, and it seems that the Russians are trying to cut the settlement of Korovy Yar from supply and support. It seems that the Russians are preparing themselves before the beginning of a major offensive operation in this direction as well. Furthermore, the Russians and neutral mappers reported that Russians improved their positions around the settlement of Alexandrovka. Maybe in coming days we will receive additional updates from this territory. As for the eastern Slaviansk direction, we still receive lots of updates of how Russians were bombing and attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine through this territory, but without changes on the ground. Maybe the Russians are waiting better weather, maybe the Russians are waiting for the end of talks that are going to take place on the 1st of February on the territory of Abu Dhabi. As for the Konstantinovka direction, during the previous 24 hours we received lots of updates, and the most important are coming from the southern direction. First of all, according to pro-Russian sources, the Russians managed to cut in pincers the settlement of Bereztok. It seems that in coming days the Russians may try to finish the battle for the territory. And another important thing is that the Russians began bombing and attacking the city of Konstantinovka heavily with all types of weapons, with all means they have. In this video we can see a very heavy explosion. Most likely the Russians discovered something like a warehouse or ammo depot, because right after this attack we can see a very heavy explosion, which means that there was something like a secondary detonation. So too many explosions. Another important video is coming from the territory a bit further to the north. Here we can see another very heavy explosion. As a result of attack, another micro district was heavily damaged. So it seems that the Russians are trying to break through Ukrainian defense in this area with the purpose to improve their positions and to answer the Konstantinovka citadel itself. In the northern part of the city, we can see that Ukrainians continue sending weapons and arms in the direction of the city of Konstantinovka, but the Russians control the situation with FPV drones, and they try to destroy everything that is approaching the city itself, trying to cut the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of the city from supply and support. As for the Dobropolye direction, nothing special. As for the Zaporozhye direction, nothing special as well. The Russians continue their offensive operation, trying to get as deep as possible and trying to break through Ukrainian defense, but according to the updates we are receiving, it seems that Ukrainians managed to stabilize the situation in this area, and currently the Ukrainians are not allowing the Russians to move further. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.